Well, I think it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, we had a journal of Biola, and it was called The King's Business. And that is a good name. This is the vocation of doing the King's business. And the King's business is to take your life. See, it turns out that the minas, it's not really, the parable is not about money, it's about just who you are. It's about what God has given you. You're the allotment of what God has. You're the minas. And you are to do business with it. You are to make something of it. And notice here, lots of freedom. There's not much advice about how you're supposed to do that. He's not going to say, look, this is where you go, you go, you go. He says, you make an investment. There's going to be an awful lot of freedom. This is going to be the same kind of freedom Adam and Eve got. Rule over the garden. But just, but submit to what God says is good. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that you're not to eat of. And that means that you're to submit to what God says is good. You're to submit to God's will of the good and the bad. So this is a lot of freedom in being a steward. It's going to be bound, of course, by love. It's going to be bound by just obeying the commands of God. And this is about giving an account, right? In verse 15, he comes back and he says, what did you do with it? What did you do with all that I gave you? And this is going to raise the question of fear. There are going to be some of you who are fearful. There are going to be some of you who are going to feel God is he's a mean man. He's exacting. And he's asking me to do things that he doesn't even do. And that will cause some of you to not go at working in the way you ought to work. You're going to think of God perhaps the way you think of your father, or the way that you think of some other people that you've met in life. One more text to look at. This is Matthew chapter 25. The second parable about this. Matthew 25, verse 14 to 30. Matthew 25, verse 14 to 30. He's talking here now in the context about the kingdom of God. What is the kingdom of God comparable to, right? That's 25, verse 1. Well, now in verse 14 it says, I'll give you another illustration. For it, meaning the kingdom of God, for the kingdom of God is just like a man about to go on a journey, who called his own slave and entrusted his possessions to them. And to one he gave 5 talents. Now, the talent, I mean, the minas that's a fair amount of money. Talents are huge, right? A talent in this day was worth about 15 years of wages. So this is a very large amount. To one he gave 5 talents, right? That would be the equivalent of what? 75 years of wages. To another he gave 2. To another 1. And notice here it says, each according to his own ability. Each according to what that person is. Now this is gonna be a major issue here, the way God has made one. So each according to his ability. And then he went on his journey. And immediately the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded, gained 5 more. In the same manner the one who received 2 gained 2 more. But he received the 1 talent, went away, dug it in the ground, and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, see, this is, what is the kingdom of God going to be like? The king's going away, right? A ruler, he's going away. A man who owns the vineyard, he's going away. And his servants and his slaves are going to have to do the work. This is the disciples. And it may be a long time. Now after a long time, the masters of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Right? Settling accounts. Notice the business element of this. And the one who received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I've gained 5 more. His master said, well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things, and I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. The one also who had received the 2 talents came and said, Master, you entrusted to me 2 talents. See, I've gained 2 more. And his master said, well done, good and faithful slave. You're faithful with a few, I'll put you in charge of many. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one who had received the 1 talent came and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. In other words, you're the exacting guy. God, you're a tough guy. You're hard on me. You've been hard in my circumstances. You only gave me 1 talent in the first place. There are a lot of issues here. And I was afraid. And I went away and hid your talent in the ground. So see, you have what's yours, right? I'm giving you back just what I am. I didn't do anything with it. But his master answered and said, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I scattered no seed. In other words, if you actually thought that about me, then you have a lot to at least put my money in the bank. And on my arrival, I'd receive it, at least with some interest. Therefore, take away the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. And here's the principle again. For everyone who has shall more be given. And he shall have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have will be taken away. And verse 30 this is especially hard. And cast out that worthless slave into outer darkness. And in that place there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Well, I mean, this sounds like hell. This sounds like a terrible place. So I don't know how much we ought to make of all of this, whether this is even referring to non-believers. That unbelievers, they have a stewardship with their life. And now they have done nothing for the Lord with that. But again, we're back to this principle. And here, the principles of do business for me. Give an account. And here we add, and it's according to each person's ability. So here might be a definition of this vocation as free steward. It's the steward, so number 1, I'll give you about 7 elements. 1, it's the stewardship of each believer. This is the definition. It's the stewardship of each believer with what was the king's business, in which now we have become a manager of his property. We become a manager, a steward. So it's the stewardship of each believer in which what was the king's business, it has now become our business. And our business is to manage his property. And do you know what his property is? It's you and me. We are the properties. We're the talents. We're the minas. We are his investment. We are, and it's all the circumstances and monies and everything that has been allotted to us in his grace. This is now what we have. What was the king's business, now we're managers of his property, and we're his property. We have been, like it says in 1 Corinthians 6:19, we have been bought with a price. You are not your own anymore, but you're the Lord's, because you've been bought with a price. The second point is that, and we are to give a return of this investment. We are to give a return of this investment. We are to give a return on managing the property that is God's and it's ourselves. I'm to give a return to God about my life. The third point, and it's to be according to what God has allotted to each person. So 3, it's according to what God has allotted to each person in terms of natural abilities and opportunities. And so it's going to be according to this allotment. 4, and it will be in the king's absence. He's not going to be here to give us every detail of what to do. Now, he has sent his Spirit. But the Spirit's task is not to give you every element of every little piece of knowing what to do here. The Spirit's task is to be with us as we engage in much of our freedom. Sometime in anxiety, we're asking the Lord to reveal something specific, and the Lord just wants to say, I give you the freedom to do that, and trust me in this. And number 5, it's with maximal legitimate freedom. This stewardship is maximal legitimate freedom. Wide freedom. We're not given all the details, but it's bound by our covenant with God. It's bound by the promises. It's bound by the general commands of love, spiritual formation, growth, the good works. It's bound by His sovereignty in our life. It's bound by our circumstances. But those of you who have freedom, much freedom, oh, it's very open. And number 6, however, with these freedoms, fear may inhibit these freedoms. We have these freedoms. We have this maximal freedom, but which fear can inhibit. Fear, because we have transferred feelings that we have about other people, people who've been in authority over us. We have transferred those feelings now to God. He's tough. He's hard. I don't know if He's going to be pleased with this. If I move out and do this, I don't know. Maybe He'll check me on this. I don't know if I can do this. And number 7, it's all for which we will give an account. It's all for which we will give an account. We'll have to give account. What did I do with my life? The King's business. So the vocation as a free steward is the stewardship of each believer, so that what was the King's business, I am now a manager of, which is myself. And it's according to what God has allotted to each person. It's to give a return of investment. It's all done in the King's absence, with maximal freedom, bounded by what is good and true, which fear may inhibit, and all of which we will have to give an account. So let me make some comments under this now. Let me make a couple of comments, a couple of points. I think there's about 5 major points I want to make under this vocation of freedom. The first one is this. The vocation of freedom, or this vocation of being a free steward, is seen much as a business transaction. That's the language that Jesus wants to portray this as. It's the language of a business transaction. There's a certain crassness to it. There's a certain matter-of-factness to it. There's a certain little bit like the Nike commercial. It's a little bit of do it. There's an emphasis on responsibility. There's an emphasis on being faithful to what you have. There's an emphasis on return. There's an emphasis on fruit that we bear. There's an emphasis on a range of freedom, incredible amount of freedom that is bound only by the good and the true, God's will, and how He's revealed it. But an incredible amount of freedom that we can express in this. There's an emphasis on risk. There is an emphasis on that you're going to have to take a risk with life, with your life, to do business for the King. Emphasis on accountability. There's an emphasis on expectation. He's going to come back and say, okay, give me a return. Give me a return. There's an emphasis on having worked through your fears. Some of you have too little caution. Some of you and some of us are responding to so many false calls because we're wanting to make a vocation. We're wanting to become somebody important. But there'll be some of you who have the opposite fear, and the opposite problem, and that is fear. Fear that you'll fail. Fear that God is hard. Fear that if you do something, it'll be wrong and it won't be good enough because He's a hard guy. It just won't be good enough for Him. And He's a hard man. And it feels like it's never enough. It's never good enough. And you're going to have to work through these things. You have to work through so that you can find freedom in God. It's okay. It's okay to fail. It's okay to risk. It's okay to experiment with my life. It's okay to work and see what happens. So the emphasis is on working through these. The emphasis is on your allotment. There's an emphasis on who are you? How has God made you? Your abilities. An emphasis on how has in the allotment, what are your circumstances? What is it that can open up for you to do even more things, to give yourself, or what is it that's closed down? What are your opportunities